I don't really care what you filthy animals think this looks like. To me, it's a flower, which, of course, is a euphemism for what you filthy degenerates think it looks like. But a tulip's a tulip, and in keeping with that theme, I do have a tulip wood platter coming. The rest of the platters in this series are available for pre-order on the website, including the tulip wood version, but I might reserve that as a patron exclusive giveaway prize. So it'd be a good idea to secure it now before I change my mind. When you get to the website, you'll also see what I invented to take projects like this to a whole other level. And yes, I'll be talking about that in this video, but I'm currently in the pre-Kickstarter phase, which is what the patron area of the website is for. And as a quick aside, I'm a pretty firm believer that Kickstarter backers should be treated as investors. So if you want to make some money, this is worth looking at. But I was not able to use the invention on this particular platter. This platter was made using completely conventional methods, which really caused me a lot of problems along the way and resulted in a quality that I'm not satisfied with. The rest of this series will be made with that product though, so this particular platter is of an inferior quality to the other 14 that are coming. But this project is a very good first rough draft. I consider it a proof of concept for both the initial idea and inspiration, and also as a baseline to see exactly how difficult it would be to make something like this using conventional methods. So this project took me 9 months to get from conception to get your minds out of the gutter. I'm not going to walk you through every minutia of every step in this process. There's many other better educators on YouTube for that kind of thing, but I will hit the wave tops and highlight some of the juicier bits. Let's start with the design itself and just get that out of the way. On my website, in the portfolio, you'll see the past, present, and some future projects of 5-Pack Studios. Not to be confused with the flagship projects. We'll talk about those later. But some of these include concept images. These are projects that I really want to make and am completely confident that I can make. In most cases, I can visualize the entire process from beginning to end in my head, which is very much how this came about. It likewise started as a concept image that I made using AI art tools. Because while I am an artist in some respects, I can't draw to save my life. So getting an image out of my head and into a visual medium was always a difficult process. Being able to simply describe what I was looking for and then refine the image from there, bringing it into other editing tools like Photoshop or Illustrator, was a real game changer for me. So after some mucking around, I arrived at this image. I was then able to reverse engineer it into a vector file for laser cutting. I then mirrored the image and started playing around with dimensions to get the size I was looking for. The flower jumped out at me right away, so I decided to lean into it and ordered some tulip wood, and I never saw anything else since until I posted on Reddit.
My art has been commended as being strongly valued.
It strikes me that there's a considerable amount of bullshit going on here, and there's just a few things that I'd like to clear up.
Fortunately for you weirdos, there's a second series coming where I took that mirrored image and inverted it 180 degrees, creating a completely asymmetric design. Then it was just a simple matter of acquiring the wood, milling it down into thinner planks, gluing those planks into a panel, and then laser cutting, which was actually not simple at all. Trust me when I say that the quality of your bandsaw matters, and not all woods are receptive to laser cutting. I do want to say that while some of these species can be incredibly stubborn, it's a real pleasure to work with some of the others. Shedua in particular smells like cinnamon when you cut into it.
You're a monster!
Once everything was cut, the next step was just a ridiculous amount of sanding. I spent about 4 days total at that spindle sander, and then about 2 hours with the sandblaster cleaning up just one frame. Because while laser cutting is incredibly convenient for designs like this, it does leave charring on the edge. And I could have left it, but that would not have satisfied the standard I'm going for. The only thing I didn't know for sure when I started this project was what I was going to use for the substrate. I knew it was going to be burned as part of the aesthetic. These pieces are going to sit on a charred surface, but what exactly was that surface going to be made of? I also needed to ensure the final product wasn't too heavy, and as much as possible, I really wanted to avoid seeing seam lines between any kind of panel glue up. So ideally, I was trying to find a solid panel without any glue lines that's thin, strong, and light, that would be thick and dense enough to withstand burning without any cupping or warping. In other words, I needed a miracle material. After a lot of experimentation, the answer was 3/4 inch construction plywood. The pine layers were thick enough that I wouldn't burn through them, and the glue layers made it very resistant to deformation when heat is applied. And I'm telling you all this because after all that time looking and researching and experimenting, it wasn't the heat that warped the plank. It was sealing the charred faces in resin, one side at a time. See, when resin cures, it contracts, and the rate of contraction is based on the rate of curing. So there's different formulations that cure much slower for much deeper pores. But this very thin penetrating epoxy, formulated specifically to seal porous material, hardens relatively fast. And as it cured, it cupped the plank. And for obvious reasons, it was impossible to seal both sides at the same time, because the only way to do that would be total submersion. And this kind of thin sealer epoxy would not hold up to that. You'd end up with even more problems. Now, I could have submerged it in a deep pour epoxy, but while that wouldn't have warped the panel, it would have resulted in, I believe the technical term is, a metric ton of bubbles. Sure, you can degas epoxy before you pour it, but that doesn't change the fact that if it's pouring into a porous surface, there is air in that medium. In other words, as the wood is drinking in that resin, air is escaping the wood, which will result in bubbles every time, no matter how hard you pray. And there is nothing quite so thirsty as charred wood. And this is why you'll see the pros who work with epoxy and river tables all the time pre-seal the wood before a larger pour. And here's the most annoying part. If there are any small cracks or crevices in your piece, you're still going to get bubbles and air pockets no matter how meticulous your preparations were. This simple fact caused an extra 2 months worth of work, at least 3 weeks of which was just rework, trying to repair bubbles or just completely sanding it down and starting over. I pre-sealed every single individual piece, and you can see bubbles forming and coming up as it seeps into the small crevices under the pieces. I tried to plan ahead for this. You always want to take precautions and expect things to go badly, but things went a little more badly than I anticipated. I wanted to pour deeper so that the bubbles had at least somewhere to go, and then I could just sand below the level of the bubbles that did appear, and I'd be totally fine. So in theory, any bubbles that form would come from underneath the pieces, rise up between the pieces to a level above the pieces. Unfortunately, this is where 5-Pack's law comes in. And 5-Pack's law is very simple. It states that at least 1 in 7 of your homemade epoxy forms will leak. This particular leak was so small and so slow, I didn't even notice it until the next day. And I was babysitting these. This thing is on my kitchen table, all right? So I was watching it pretty closely, but I didn't even notice it until the next day when I tried to pick it up and move it, and realized that the entire piece had been glued to the plywood it was sitting on. It didn't leak at the tape or anything that was meant to actually serve as an epoxy barrier. It leaked inside the workpiece. It seeped through a microscopic gap in the joint of the trim, and I used a liberal amount of JB Weld clear epoxy in that glue up, so that if there was any squeeze out, it would be invisible inside the resin. Spoiler alert, that didn't work either. But my point is, I was very liberal with the glue, and it still leaked. This also meant that there was no extra space above the pieces for the bubbles to go, which meant now they're trapped in between at the level of the finished surface. And just like that, several months worth of planning and preparation was ruined. So you can always count on 5-Pack's law to ruin a good thing. I even had leaks when I was finishing the marbleization and all the edging pieces. My redwood block leaked, which is why I had to put it in this bucket inside the pressure pot. I kept having to open the pot to top off the resin. I even have resin on my couch now, but that was mostly because of a stupid experiment we'll talk about another time. The moral of this story is that when it comes to epoxy resin, both leaks and bubbles,
finds a way.
I fixed the cupping caused by the seal coat by pouring a thicker layer of a different kind of epoxy and letting it self-level inside the cup. I let it cure for 2 days, flipped it upside down, and leveled the other side the same way. I fixed the bubbles on the flower face by, well, a lot more sanding. They looked so bad, I had to take it back through a drum sander and bring the whole surface layer down about 1/8 of an inch shallower, and then start all over again. That at least removed the bubbles in between the pieces, but now I was left with pieces that were no longer sealed, so I ended up having more bubbles in the surface layer, leading to more sanding, repeat ad nauseum. You can watch the ash especially drink in this new layer of resin, and I sped this up so that you can fully appreciate how quickly these bubbles form as the pores just drink it all in. You might be asking yourself why I didn't just reseal them with the penetrating epoxy, but I'll remind you, this was on my kitchen table. I didn't really have any other options as far as epoxy workspaces, and that penetrating epoxy is rank. I do not recommend sharing a space with curing epoxy, least of all that penetrating epoxy. I would not wish that on anybody. And of course, that is another problem that I'm developing a solution to, but you aren't ready for that. And I also had to fix the debacle of the piece getting glued to the base it was sitting on with that doomsday leak. As carefully as possible, I tried to slice, cut, pry, and chisel these pieces apart from each other. I was mostly successful, but there was some pretty obvious damage that needed to be fixed. And the nature of this really thin frame meant that obviously parts of it broke. So I had to piece it back together and hopefully make it look good enough that at first glance, it's passable. And yes, despite all my precautions, pouring resin on that side also resulted in the reappearance of my nemesis.
You bitch. You broke my heart.
Which brings me to the most frustrating point of all. None of these problems would have even happened if I could just immerse the whole board in resin and cure it under pressure. What took me 3 weeks in various stages, not including all the rework and correction, would have only taken 2 days. I would have gotten even distribution with full impregnation and 0 bubbles in just 2 days. And I only say 2 days because I'd be using a deep pour epoxy for various reasons. A tabletop epoxy would cure in about 8 hours. That's a lot of time saved. The fact is, the only way to truly eliminate bubbles is with positive pressure. Positive pressure also creates a stronger bond by achieving a higher degree of impregnation. I used a pressure pot to cure the cherry corners and redwood blocks so that I wouldn't have issues with milling on the CNC. And you'll see wood turners use a pressure pot just like this for curing small projects before putting the work on a lathe. It's both safer and results in a better finished product. Even when you aren't using a clear resin, the last thing you want to do is cut or sand into a piece only to uncover a brand new surface void that completely ruins the whole look of your project. Check out my trim pieces. They're a perfect example. I wasn't able to put these in a pressure pot because they're too large. So, after letting the resin cure conventionally, you can see that I'm uncovering these void spaces as they get milled down to size. These voids will always be there, hidden under the surface, just waiting to ruin your day. How many times have you seen videos of other large creators spending hours and days just covering up these voids? Even if you can fix them in a way that completely hides them, it's just time that you'll never get back doing work you shouldn't have to do. So that's why I invented and am finally ready to announce the modular pressure vessel, a positive pressure system that can scale to the size of your project. We're in the pre-Kickstarter phase right now, as the very first prototype is being built. The remaining 14 boards in this series will be finished with this system to achieve a pristine result, and are currently available for pre-order on the website to help fund the continued development of what we're calling Project Aether, the first of 4 flagship projects at 5-Pack Studios that will revolutionize more than a few industries. This video will be followed by an official announcement video, and you can learn more about the projects at 5packstudios.com right now. If you support our mission as a patron early for only $10 right now, you'll be able to designate your Kickstarter pledge as a business loan and get paid as we grow. Your pre-Kickstarter support also becomes credit in our store, so you're never giving something for nothing. And the things that are coming to the store that we'll be making with Project Aether will blow your mind. And alongside our flagship projects, I'm also launching an initiative for a cause that's very near and dear to my heart, and is a big reason I even founded this company. The sole focus of the Create Something initiative is to eliminate the barriers to entry for healthy, creative hobbies. Low-income households struggle to pay for things like music teachers, instruments, art supplies, or anything of that nature that can allow somebody to pursue a creative outlet. And take it from me, if you don't have a constructive outlet, you're going to naturally default to the destructive, which always leads to a spiraling mental health situation. Our aim is to champion the healing power of art and creativity by helping pay for those creative outlets for low-income households. You can see exactly where your donations are going and how funds are distributed on the website. So if you like the idea of helping other people, you want to be part of the development of these incredible projects, or you simply like the idea of making a profit from a Kickstarter pledge, head over to 5packstudios.com and together we can create something fucking great.